No one spoke to the billionaire's deaf son until a poor girl answered in sign language. The rain fell in silver sheets over the sprawling estate, its manicured gardens glistening under the weight of the storm. Inside the grand mansion, where chandeliers cast golden light across marble floors, a boy sat alone in a corner of the library, his small hands clutching a book he couldn't read. Julian, the billionaire's deaf son, was 10 years old, with eyes that held the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. His world was silent, not just because of his deafness, but because no one in his father's glittering circle bothered to learn his language. Servants hurried past, guests at lavish parties ignored him, and even his father, Victor Castellanos, a titan of industry, treated him like a fragile heirloom, precious but untouchable. Julian's days were a parade of isolation, his only companions the stories he imagined in the pictures of books, where knights and dreamers spoke in colors he could understand. But tonight, as thunder rattled the windows, something shifted in the air. A spark of change was coming, carried on the wings of a girl who had nothing but her heart to give. Julian's life wasn't always this lonely. Before his mother's death 3 years ago, she had filled their home with warmth, her hands dancing in sign language to tell him stories of far-off lands. She taught him to sign with confidence, her fingers weaving love into every gesture. But when she was gone, the house grew cold, and Victor buried his grief in work, leaving Julian to wander the echoing halls. The boy learned to watch the world from the edges, his sharp eyes catching the way people's lips moved without meaning, their laughter never reaching him. At school, his private tutors spoke at him, not to him, their impatience a wall he couldn't climb. The other children, heirs of wealth like him, mocked his silence or simply looked away, their cruelty born of ignorance. Julian's father hired the best specialists, bought the most advanced hearing aids, but nothing could bridge the chasm between his son and a world that refused to listen. Yet Julian held on to a flicker of hope, a belief that somewhere, someone would see him, not as the billionaire's broken son, but as a boy with a heart full of dreams. On this particular evening, the mansion buzzed with preparations for Victor's annual gala, a spectacle of wealth that drew politicians, celebrities and tycoons from across the globe. Julian hated these events. The guests, draped in silks and diamonds, would glance at him with pity before turning away, their conversations a blur of meaningless noise. He retreated to the library as he always did, curling up in a velvet armchair with a book of fairy tales. The storm outside raged on, and Julian imagined himself as a prince lost in a forest waiting for a friend who never came. Downstairs, the gala was in full swing, the clink of champagne glasses and forced laughter filling the air. But outside, beyond the iron gates, a different scene unfolded. A girl named Sophia, no older than 12, stood shivering in the rain, her thin jacket soaked through. She was the daughter of a street vendor who sold flowers in the city square, her life a stark contrast to the opulence within the mansion. Sophia had come to deliver a bouquet of roses, ordered last minute for the gala, but the guard at the gate had dismissed her, refusing to let her in. As she turned to leave, her eyes caught a flicker of movement in an upstairs window. A boy, staring out into the storm. Sophia didn't know who Julian was, but she recognized the loneliness in his gaze. She had seen it before, in the faces of children who roamed the streets like her, invisible to those who passed by. Her mother had taught her sign language years ago to communicate with a deaf neighbor, and though Sophia's hands were rough from work, they remembered the shapes of words. On impulse, she waved at the window, her fingers forming a simple greeting. "Hello?" Julian froze, his breath catching. No one had ever signed to him outside his family, not since his mother. He pressed his palms against the glass, his heart racing, and signed back, "Who are you?" Sophia grinned, her wet hair plastered to her face, and signed, "I'm Sophia. I sell flowers. Why are you alone?" The question pierced Julian like an arrow. He didn't know how to answer, but for the first time in years, someone was speaking his language, not out of obligation, but out of kindness. The rain kept Sophia at the gate, the guard too distracted by the arriving guests to notice her lingering. Julian, defying the rules of his carefully controlled life, slipped out of the library and down a servant's staircase, his sneakers silent on the stone steps. He reached the gate, his breath visible in the cold air, and faced Sophia through the iron bars. Up close, he saw her tattered shoes and the way she clutched the bouquet like a shield, but her eyes were bright, unafraid. "Why did you sign to me?" he asked, his hands trembling. Sophia tilted her head, her fingers moving with a quiet grace. "Because you looked like you needed a friend." Julian's throat tightened. A friend? The word felt foreign, like a melody he'd forgotten. They stood there, signing back and forth, the rain blurring the world around them. Sophia told him about her life, selling flowers at dawn, helping her mother cook dinner in their tiny apartment, dreaming of a day when she could go to school. Julian shared his own dreams, haltingly at first, of exploring the world beyond the mansion's walls, of finding someone who wouldn't look away. Their conversation was cut short when the guard finally noticed Sophia and barked at her to leave. Julian's heart sank as she stepped back, but before she turned away, she pressed a single rose through the bars, signing, "For you, don't give up." Julian clutched the flower, its petals soft against his fingers, and watched her disappear into the storm. Back in the mansion, the gala carried on, oblivious to the miracle that had just occurred. Julian returned to the library, the rose tucked into his pocket, its presence a secret flame against the cold. He didn't tell his father about Sophia, knowing Victor would dismiss her as insignificant, a street girl with no place in their world. But to Julian, she was everything, a voice in his silent world, a reminder that kindness could bloom where wealth could not. Days turned into weeks, and Julian couldn't forget Sophia. He began sneaking out to the city square, hoping to find her among the vendors. His father, consumed by business deals, didn't notice his absences, and the servants assumed he was hiding in the library as usual. The square was a chaos of colors and sounds Julian couldn't hear, merchants shouting, children laughing, the clatter of coins. He searched for Sophia's face, his heart sinking each time he left empty-handed. One gray morning he spotted her at last, her small figure bent over a bucket of roses, her hands red from the cold. Julian approached, his pulse racing, and signed, "I found you." Sophia's face lit up, and she signed back, "I knew you'd come." They sat on a bench, sharing a bag of roasted chestnuts Sophia had bought with her earnings, and talked as if they'd known each other forever. She taught him new signs, her laughter silent but bright, and he told her about the stars he saw from his window, naming them in his mind. Their friendship grew in stolen moments, a secret kept from the worlds that divided them. Sophia introduced Julian to her mother, Elena, a woman with tired eyes and a warm smile, who welcomed him into their cramped apartment without question. There Julian tasted homemade tamales and felt, for the first time, the warmth of a family that saw him as more than a billionaire's son. But the divide between their lives couldn't stay hidden forever. One day a chauffeur spotted Julian in the square and reported back to Victor. Furious, Victor confronted his son, demanding to know why he was sneaking out to meet a street urchin. Julian, his hands shaking but resolute, signed, "She's my friend. She talks to me." "You don't." The word struck Victor like a slap. He saw for the first time the depth of his son's loneliness, the failure of his wealth to buy what mattered most. But pride held him back, and he forbade Julian from seeing Sophia again, locking the mansion's gates tighter than ever. Julian's world darkened. The library, once his refuge, felt like a cage. He stopped eating, stopped signing, his hope fading like a flower without water. Sophia, too, felt the loss, her days at the square emptier without Julian's shy smile. She didn't know his address, didn't know how to reach him, but she refused to give up. One evening, she slipped a note into a bouquet destined for the Castellanos mansion, a desperate plea written in simple words. "Julian, you are enough. Don't stop dreaming." She signed it with her name and a small drawing of a rose. By chance, or perhaps fate, the note reached Julian, tucked inside a delivery of flowers for another gala. When he found it, tears welled in his eyes. He hid the note under his pillow, reading it each night, its words a lifeline pulling him back from despair. The turning point came unexpectedly, as profound moments often do. Victor, haunted by his son's silence and the accusation in his signs, began to question his own choices. He hired a tutor to teach him sign language, his clumsy fingers struggling to form the words he'd never bothered to learn. One night he found Julian in the library, the note from Sophia clutched in his hand. Victor sat beside him, his heart heavy, and signed haltingly, "I'm sorry." "I want to know you." Julian stared.